There's a countdown running inside Bitcoin right now. In a matter of days, at one exact point on the blockchain, block 961632, a group of Bitcoiners is going to try to change the rules of Bitcoin itself. And they are not the only ones. A long respected developer has announced that this August, he'll hard fork the entire network and hand every single holder a brand new coin, minted out of thin air. The headlines are calling it a civil war. And even Michael Saylor, a man who almost never touches Bitcoin's internal politics, just broke his silence to warn that one side's plan could damage the very thing it claims to protect. So this weekend I did the thing almost none of the channels shouting about this actually did. I sat down and read it. The actual proposal. The code change that started the whole fight. The miner signaling data, block by block. All of it. And here's what I found. The most important number in this entire war isn't a price. It's how many miners actually back the change. Less than 1%. Once you understand what that number is really measuring, you'll know exactly how this ends, before the deadline even arrives. Because here's the part that should actually calm you down, and I'm going to prove it to you, not just assert it. They can propose any change they want. They cannot make you take it. The one promise you were sold, 21 million, fixed, no committee in charge, is about to get the most public stress test it has ever had, and it's going to hold. I'll show you the exact mechanism that makes that true. But there's a second piece, and this one can actually cost you money. That free coin I mentioned, minted out of thin air and handed to every holder, the minute it's announced, your replies and your inbox are going to fill with people telling you how to claim it. Some of them will ask for your seed phrase. I'll tell you exactly what that free coin actually is, whether it's worth $1, and the one thing you must never do to get it. There are no certainties here, only probabilities. And anyone selling you pure panic about your Bitcoin this month is selling you something. I'm Tim. This is Tim Talks Finance, where we take the scary headline and follow it all the way down to what it actually means for your money. Let's get into it. Here's what's actually happening in plain English before we go deep. There are two separate events lined up for August. Two, and the crypto channels are blending them together into one giant scary word, the fork, because fear gets clicks. We're going to pull them apart because they are not the same thing, and one of them matters a lot more than the other. The first one is a genuine fight happening inside the Bitcoin community right now. Not from China, not from the SEC, not from quantum computers, from Bitcoiners themselves. Two camps, and they have been at each other's throats for months over something called BIP 110. One side is being called the monetary purists, the other, the consensus keepers. And in the last few weeks, it stopped being a nerdy argument on a forum and spilled onto the main stage. When Michael Saylor, a man who has said almost nothing about Bitcoin's internal politics, ever, comes out and calls a proposal, and I quote, an iatrogenic proposal. That's a word doctors use. It means an injury caused by the person who's supposed to be healing you, the treatment that hurts the patient. When Saylor reaches for that word, you know the temperature in the room. The second event is a completely different animal. A developer named Paul Sztorc has announced that at a specific point in August, at Bitcoin block 964,000, he's going to hard fork Bitcoin and create a duplicate, a one-to-one copy. Every person holding Bitcoin would, in theory, get an equal amount of this new coin. And I want you to sit in the feeling this creates for a second, because it's the whole reason this video exists. You were told Bitcoin can't be changed. That's the entire pitch. That's why you were willing to put your savings into a string of computer code instead of a bank. And now you've got developers forking it, cloning it, fighting a civil war over it. It feels like you were lied to. It feels like maybe this thing has a committee after all, just a messier one. That feeling is exactly what I want to walk you through, because that feeling is wrong, and the reason it's wrong is the single most important thing you will ever understand about why Bitcoin exists. Here's the tell. In every past version of this story, and there have been several, the people trying to change Bitcoin promised the world bigger blocks, faster payments, a better Bitcoin. In 2017, they split off and made something called Bitcoin Cash. A year later, another group split off from that and made Bitcoin SV. Both of them claim to be the real Bitcoin. Go look at where those coins are today against Bitcoin. They didn't just lose, they collapsed into irrelevance. 90 something percent gone relative to the coin they tried to replace. So hold that thought because it's the pattern that's about to repeat. Now, to understand why every attempt to change Bitcoin ends the same way, you have to understand the thing that almost nobody explains. Who is actually in charge of Bitcoin? Not who you think. And it's the answer to that question that decides everything. Let's start with what a fork even is, because the word is doing a lot of scary work and it shouldn't. Bitcoin is just software. It's a set of rules running on tens of thousands of computers all over the world at the same time. Every one of those computers is called a node, and every node holds the entire history of every Bitcoin transaction ever made. And, this is the key, every node independently checks that the rules are being followed. A fork is simply what happens when somebody proposes to change the rules. That's it. If everyone agrees and updates together, we call it an upgrade. If some people update and some refuse, the chain can fork, split into two paths. There are two kinds, and the difference is everything. A soft fork tightens the rules. It makes them stricter. Old computers still see the new blocks as valid, so the network tends to stay together. That's what BIP 110 is. A hard fork loosens or changes the rules in a way old computers reject. That forces a split into two separate coins. That's what Paul Sztorc's August clone is. Okay, now the first fight, BIP 110. Let me tell you where it even came from, because it's genuinely interesting and it tells you what this community actually is. Back in October, the main Bitcoin software, it's called Bitcoin Core, released a new version. And in it, they relaxed a limit that had sat quietly in the code for over a decade. There's a little space in every transaction where you can attach data. It's called OP_return. And for years, it was capped at 83 bytes. Tiny, just enough for a note. Version 30 of Core cracked that wide open, up to 100,000 bytes. Now, why would anyone care? Because suddenly you can jam things into Bitcoin that aren't money. Images, tokens, files, junk. And a big chunk of the community looked at that and said, wait, Bitcoin was built to be money, peer-to-peer electronic cash, not a hard drive for other people's JPEGs that every node on Earth has to store forever, at their own cost, for all time. And there's an undercurrent here that's very us, because it's a follow the money story. For most of Bitcoin's life, the developers who worked on Core did it as volunteers, nights and weekends, unpaid, because they believed in it. That has changed. A lot of today's Core developers are funded by large companies now, the kind of institutions that would love Bitcoin to become a general purpose data network they can build products on top of, instead of just hard, boring money. So when the node runners watch Core quietly loosen the rules to allow more data on the chain, a lot of them don't just see a technical tweak. They see the incentives drifting, away from the people who hold Bitcoin as savings, and toward the people who want to monetize the network. I'm not here to tell you which side is right. Smart, honest people sit on both. The point for you is bigger than the argument. Neither side can force the other. So a group of them, clustered around a rival version of the software called Bitcoin Knots, pushed back. And they wrote BIP 110. In plain terms, it's a temporary rule that says no, we're going to keep Bitcoin lean and focused on money, and we're going to squeeze the junk data back out. They tested it against 5 million real transactions. It filtered out about 40% of the non-money junk. And how many legitimate payments did it block? 0. Now here's the part that matters for you, the saver. Watch how they're trying to do it. We're about halfway in, and this is the hinge of the whole video, so stay locked in. Everything up to here was the what. This, right here, is the why it can't be forced on anybody. This is the thing that makes Bitcoin different from every dollar in your bank account. BIP 110 is what's called a user-activated soft fork. The people who want it are signaling by running the software on their own nodes. And more than 1,000 nodes are already enforcing it. That's more than were behind some famous upgrades in the past. To flip it on across the network, the proposal needs miners, the computers that actually build the blocks, to signal support. Historically, big changes needed 95% of miners to agree. This one is designed to trigger at just 50% at a specific block, 961632, which lands right about now. So how many miners are signaling for it today? Less than 1%. When I sat down to dig into the actual data for this video, it was sitting at about a third of a single percent. Not 95, not 50, a fraction of 1%. And that tells you almost everything. Because here's the mechanism nobody explains. And it's the answer to who controls Bitcoin. It is not the developers. Developers can only propose. They can write any code they want, they cannot put it on your computer. It is not the miners either. Miners produce blocks. But if a miner produces a block that breaks the rules your node is enforcing, your node throws it in the garbage. It's rejected. Invalid. The miner just wasted millions of dollars of electricity for nothing. The people who actually control Bitcoin are the ones running the nodes and holding the coins. The economic majority. You. The rule of Bitcoin is not longest chain wins or most miners win. The rule is the network follows the software that the people with the value choose to run. And you cannot force those people. You can't bribe them all. You can't vote them down. You can't sanction them. You can only convince them one by one, node by node. And if you can't get overwhelming agreement, your change simply does not happen. That is why this is so messy. That is why there's a civil war. It's not a bug. A committee would have settled this in an afternoon with a vote. Bitcoin can't be settled with a vote because there's no one with the authority to hold the vote. The mess is the decentralization working in real time, out in the open, in front of all of us. And if this pattern sounds familiar, it should, because Bitcoin has already survived a civil war far bigger than this one. Rewind to 2015 through 2017. Back then, the fight was over block size, how much data each block could carry. And the people who wanted to change it weren't some tiny fringe you could measure in fractions of a percent. They were the giants. Major mining companies, big exchanges, some of the biggest businesses in the entire industry. They held summits. They signed something called the New York Agreement. And on paper, they had the hash power and the money to force it through. It looked completely unstoppable. The Change Bitcoin side looked like it had already won. And then the users said no. Ordinary people, running nodes in their spare bedrooms, simply refused to run the new software. They couldn't be voted down because there was no vote. They couldn't be overpowered because the miners' blocks became worthless the moment the users' nodes rejected them. And one by one, the companies that signed that agreement backed down because they slammed into the brutal truth of Bitcoin. You can own all the mining power on Earth, and it means nothing if the people holding the coins won't run your rules. The big money side lost. They split off and created Bitcoin Cash, the coin I mentioned a minute ago. And Bitcoin Cash went on to lose well over 90% of its value against Bitcoin. The most powerful players in the entire industry threw everything they had at changing Bitcoin, and a leaderless network of ordinary savers beat them. That's not a theory. That happened. And it is exactly why the people who actually know Bitcoin's history look at a fraction of 1% of miners today and don't lose a single minute of sleep. And that brings us to the second event, the clone. Because once you understand that no one can force a change, you understand exactly what Paul Sztorc is really doing. And it's not what the free money headlines are telling you. So Sztorc is going to hard fork at block 964,000 and hand every Bitcoin holder a matching amount of a new coin. Sounds huge. Sounds like they're changing Bitcoin. They're not. And this is the reveal I promised you. Making a copy of Bitcoin is trivial. The code is open source. Anyone on Earth, you, me, a teenager with a laptop, can download it, change a few lines, and launch Timcoin this afternoon, and give every Bitcoin holder a matching balance on my new chain. It has been done dozens of times. Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Diamond. Yes, those are all real. And to be fair to Paul Sztorc, he is not some anonymous scammer. He's a serious, long-respected Bitcoin developer who's been building toward these ideas for years. His plan is genuinely controversial. Parts of it have people in the community calling it a straight up money grab. But whether they're right or wrong, that's almost beside the point. Because watch what happens even when a real, credible, talented developer decides he wants to change Bitcoin. He can't. The most he can do is walk away, start a separate chain, and invite people to follow him onto it. He can build the door. He cannot make one single person walk through it. Not talent, not sincerity, not a genuinely clever idea. None of it can move 21 million. Because there is nobody to convince but everybody, all at once. Copying Bitcoin does not change Bitcoin any more than photocopying a $100 bill changes the 100 in your wallet. The original is untouched. What you've made is a new thing, and now it has to go out into the world and answer the only question that matters. Will anybody actually treat it as money? Will exchanges list it? Will people hold it instead of Bitcoin? Will it be worth anything in a year? And the historical answer every single time is no. So let me answer the question I opened with directly, because you deserve a straight answer, not a cliffhanger. Are your coins at risk from any of this? No. In a soft fork like BIP 110, the rules just get tighter. Your Bitcoin is still your Bitcoin. Your keys still work. Nothing about your 21 million capped coins changes. In a hard fork clone like Stork's, your Bitcoin sits exactly where it was, and a copy appears on a separate chain that the market will almost certainly ignore. Your risk in both cases is zero, as long as you do nothing foolish. And I'll tell you what foolish looks like in a minute, because this is where people actually lose money. Now step back and look at what we just watched. A determined, funded, motivated faction of very smart people has been trying to change Bitcoin for months. They wrote the code, they ran the nodes, they got Michael Saylor to weigh in, they got headlines around the world. And where are they? Under 1%. They cannot make you accept it. They cannot make the network accept it. The overwhelming likelihood, and one of their own lead developers put the odds of it passing at somewhere between 5 and 15%, is that this fizzles, exactly like every attempt before it. Now I want you to compare that, really compare it, to the dollar in your bank account. In 1971, one man, Richard Nixon, went on television on a Sunday night and changed what the dollar fundamentally was. He cut its last tie to gold. No vote of the people, no node network, no consensus to win. One signature, one committee, one evening, and the money in every American's pocket was permanently altered. And every year since, a small group of people at the Federal Reserve has sat in a room and decided to make your dollars worth about 2% less, on purpose, forever. That's not a conspiracy. It's their published, stated target. That is what an issuer looks like. Somebody with a lever. And in a system built on debt, every lever eventually gets pulled. So here's the thing I need you to actually feel. The fork drama isn't proof that Bitcoin has an issuer. It is the single greatest proof in Bitcoin's history that it doesn't. You are watching, live, a serious attempt to change Bitcoin, and you are watching it fail, because there is no one with the power to force it. The dollar can be changed on a Sunday night by one man. Bitcoin can't be changed in months by a small army of experts who desperately want to. That difference is the entire product. That is the whole reason this asset exists. There's a deeper version of this too, and it's worth 30 seconds. Think about what the dollar requires to work. A bank, a payment processor, a central bank. At every single step, there is a counterparty. Someone in the middle who can freeze your account, reverse your payment, or debank you because a committee decided your views weren't compatible with the bank's values. That's not hypothetical. It's happened to truckers in Canada, to account holders in the UK, to entire legal industries here in the US. Every counterparty is a control point. Think about what that actually means. In early 2022, the Canadian government told the banks to freeze the accounts of people who donated to a protest. And the banks did it. No court order, no conviction, just a name on a list and a frozen account. 2 years later, a federal court ruled the whole thing unconstitutional. But by then, the lesson had already been taught. The account you think is yours right up until the moment a committee decides it isn't. Bitcoin's whole design is the removal of the counterparty. It doesn't know who you are. It can't be told to say no to you. 21 million, enforced not by a promise, but by tens of thousands of independent machines whose entire purpose is to never let that number change. And, as we're seeing this month, they won't, even when insiders beg them to. Quick practical note, because this is the exact machine we're talking about. I keep a free page called the Macro Command Center. It puts the 6 numbers that actually decide the value of your money on one screen. Real inflation, the money supply, what the Treasury is issuing, the interest on the debt. It's the same board I read every morning. It's free, there's no credit card, the link's in the description. Because you shouldn't take my word that the dollar is being changed under you. You should watch it happen with your own eyes. So the network holds. Your coins are safe. Then the only question left is the practical one. What, if anything, do you actually do? And here's where I have to protect you, because this is where the real money gets lost. What do you do about the August fork? Almost certainly nothing. Hold your keys. Hold your coins. Let the noise pass. That's it. That's the move. The calm answer is the correct answer, and anybody selling you urgency about your Bitcoin right now is selling you something. But here's the trap I promised you, the free money trap, and it's the one thing that can actually hurt you. When a hard fork like Stork's clone happens and every holder gets a free coin, the scammers come out in force. You will see websites, emails, and slick videos telling you to claim your fork coins. They'll ask you to enter your seed phrase, your private keys, into a site to unlock your new coins. The moment you type your seed phrase into anything to claim a free coin, your real Bitcoin is gone, emptied. That is not me being cautious. That is the number one way people get robbed during every single fork. The fork itself can't touch your coins. The scam around the fork absolutely can. So write this down. You never, ever put your keys into a website to claim anything. If a fork coin is ever worth dealing with, and it usually isn't, there's a safe way to do it, and it never involves your seed phrase. When in doubt, do nothing. Now, that number from the very start, the miner support stuck under 1%. Let me close that loop. Support that low isn't just a weak number. It's the whole story told in advance. Because to change Bitcoin, you don't need a good idea, and you don't need smart people. The people pushing this are smart, and some of their concerns are legitimate. You need overwhelming consensus of the economic majority. And a fraction of 1% is the network telling you out loud before the deadline that this consensus does not exist. You are watching the answer arrive early. The change will not take because the one thing required to change Bitcoin, everybody agreeing, is the one thing you cannot manufacture. So here's how to actually watch this play out, like an adult, instead of panicking at headlines. 3 signals. Signal 1. Miner signaling at block 961632. Does that support climb up off the floor toward 50? If it doesn't, and it almost certainly won't, BIP 110 simply doesn't activate, and the Civil War ends with a whimper. Signal 2. The exchanges. When Stork's clone launches, watch whether any serious exchange or custodian actually supports it. If Coinbase, Kraken, and the big custodians shrug and ignore it, and they will, it's a dead coin walking, no matter how many were handed out. Signal 3. The node share. Watch the split between Core and Knots software over the coming months. That's the real governance of Bitcoin, happening in the open, in slow motion. Not a vote, a gradual, voluntary, unstoppable convergence of what people choose to run. Watch those three, and you'll understand this story better than 90% of the people shouting about it online. And notice where all three of them point. Every one of them leads back to the same fact. Nobody is in charge, so nobody can change it. The truth about this fork, followed all the way down, lands exactly where the truth about the dollar and the debt and inflation always lands. On the one asset with no issuer, no committee, and no lever. 21 million. Fixed. Forever. Not because a rule says so, but because the whole world running the software refuses to let it be otherwise. This month, you get to watch them refuse. This isn't me telling you to buy anything. There are no certainties here, only probabilities. Bitcoin is volatile. It has fallen 50% before, and it will again. And it's been quiet and boring this summer. None of that is the point. The point is the property. In a decade where a committee can change your dollar on a Sunday night, holding one thing that a small army of experts can't change in a year, that's not a trade. That's an exit. I'll hand you the math and the door. You walk through it on your own time. So, are they trying to change Bitcoin next month? Yes. Genuinely. A real fight, real proposals, real drama. Can they? No. And the miner support, stuck under 1%, already told you that before the deadline arrived. That's the takeaway I want to leave you with. The thing that looks like Bitcoin's weakness this month, the messy, public, leaderless fight, is actually the entire product you were buying. An asset that can't be quietly changed by the people in charge because there are no people in charge. The 6 numbers I'd watch to see the dollar being changed under you, inflation, money supply, the debt, the rest, they're all free on the Macro Command Center. Links in the description. It takes 2 minutes. Next week, I'm breaking down the Fed's decision and what the new chair just did to your savings, and there's a number in it that changes the whole picture. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.